We stubbed out our add day form in a previous video, but we never really put together the form that makes up this page. Let's go ahead and do this now so that we can collect values for resort, date, powder, and backcountry and add them to our list. So in our add day form, I've already added these prop types for you for add day form. We're going to be collecting, as I said, resort, date, powder, and backcountry, and we're importing prop types from React. Now the next thing that I want to do here is I want to replace our add day form with a class component. So class add day form extends component, and we'll make sure that we import component from React. Now what we want to render here is our form. So let's return a form. And the form should have a class name of add day form. Now within our form, we're going to add a few different inputs. So our first input will be the text field for resort. So we're going to give it an ID of resort, a type of text, and then we can give it the attribute required. So this is an HTML5 attribute that we can incorporate into JSX. We'll also say input ID date, and this is going to be a date field, and we'll also make this required. Let's also add an input here for powder, which will be a type checkbox. And finally, our backcountry. Cool, so if we take a look at this in the browser, we should see that this is starting to take shape. Our form fields are out here on the page. Now we want to make this a little bit nicer by adding some labels. So we can add HTML labels. The first one is for resort name. And we also can use for. So in HTML we would use for, but for is a reserved word in JavaScript. So the way we handle this in JSX is HTML4. So this is for the resort field, and we're using this for resort name. Let's go ahead and add one for date. So this is for our date, and we'll give it the value of date. Let me just separate these with some spaces so we can read them. The final thing we want to do here is wrap both of our checkboxes in divs so they appear a little nicer. So we're going to add that div here. We're going to give it a label. This label should be for powder, and we'll call it powder day. And then finally we'll create one last div, and we'll give that a label too, and indent it real nice as well. And this will be called backcountry day. And this one I'll have to hit enter because it's a long one. Cool, so we should have all of our different labels, our divs wrapped around our checkboxes. So now we see that our output is starting to look pretty good. Another pretty cool thing we can do here is we can populate our data from default props. So we're going to say add day form dot default props as we've done before. And we'll set this equal to the object. And here we're going to use our keys of resort. We'll say it's Kirkwood. Date, we will say is 2017 2/12. Whoops. And then we will say it's a powder day. And we'll also say it's not a backcountry day. Awesome. So how do I attach this to our fields? Well, I can add some attributes to the inputs. So the first I want to add here is going to make this line too long. So I'm going to hit enter a couple times. So the attribute we're going to add is default value. So default value is going to be set equal to resort. And the reason I can get away with using resort is because we're going to destructure all of these different properties. So we'll say const, and I'll do them all now, resort, date, powder, and backcountry equals this.props. So now when I'm dealing with these long inputs, I can handle it a little easier. So let's add these to all of our fields. Default value equals date. Now our checkboxes don't have default values. The property we can use here is default checked. And we're going to set default checked either to true or false. And we can pull that data from our default props. So we're just going to say default checked is powder. And finally, default checked equals backcountry. Cool. So let's take a look at this in the browser. And now we see that all of our fields are preloaded with our default props.